everyone, this is Bob Martin with the Nautilus Drydocks, and today we are going to be building up our very cool 1/300th scale SeaQuest DSV model from the television series of the same name. This model kit is available at nautilusdrydocks.com if you're interested in acquiring one for yourself. This video is going to be a front-to-back build-up video walking you through the entire process from beginning to end. You end up with a beautiful display model of the SeaQuest for your collection. Let's begin with an overview of the kit. As you can see in the back here, we've got the three main hull pieces. We've got the forward section, the central EVA sphere. So this is the sphere where all of the vehicles were stored, and then you've got the doors that open on the outside of it. The rear hull section, your engine section. You've got your engine nozzles, the fins off the back that give that SeaQuest that very cool splayed squid-like look. We've got all of our small detail pieces, including the option for open or closed EVA doors, communications array, and some hydraulic cylinder parts. We've got our display stand pieces, including the display plaque. We've got a scale model of the speeder, and that's all 3D printed in exceptionally high detail. We've got some metal peripheral parts that we're going to be using to actuate our rear fins, the instructions, and what you'll also get with the kit is a very cool 24 by 36 inch poster, technical poster showing the blueprints of the boat. One thing I'll note about this kit is, due to its size, it is a great candidate for RC conversion. Now, I have not yet attempted it myself, but I've begun preparation. I have modified the rear engine to allow for a large propeller to be in there, and it's going to have a ducted nozzle, or a quart nozzle, inside that'll allow two full axes of movement for pitch control and rudder control. So I won't be getting into that in this video. That'll be a separate one, but I just wanted to let you know that as a candidate for RC conversion, due to its size, this is a great project. In terms of parts, you're going to need a few supplies, but not too many to get going. I've got some coarse and fine grit sandpapers. I've got a file, sharp hobby knife, and two different types of CA glue. I've got thin cyanoacrylate, and then I've got what is my new favorite cyanoacrylate glue. This is made by Gorilla brand, and this is their super glue gel. I love this stuff. It really takes well to the accelerator. It's nice and thick, and it's absolutely bulletproof once it is cured. Other thing I recommend you having on hand is a nice clean rag or towel in case you get some glue or paint somewhere that you don't want it. So now that you've got an idea about what the kit looks like, let's move on to construction. So the way that I typically start, and what I like to do so that I have a boat that looks like a boat to work on, is assembling the three main hull pieces. In the instructions, I recommend the use of a two-part epoxy glue. You'll have your resin and your activator. Typically mix them in equal portions. This is a 5-minute epoxy, works really good. I like the Loctite brand. What I've actually found, though, is that awesome gel glue that I was telling you about earlier works exceptionally well as well. And it sets up a little bit faster than the epoxy, so once you get it set in place, the odds of it moving around on you are a little bit slimmer. It's completely your preference. Realistically, the epoxy is likely a little bit stronger, so whichever your preference is. What we're going to want to do to prep these parts is take your coarse grit sandpaper and rough up the mating surfaces on all of the parts. Just going to use our coarse grit sandpaper, rub that up just a little bit, just to rough it up and give the glue something to grab onto when we glue these together. So first step, all of these parts rough up those mating surfaces. All right, for the actual gluing process, what I like to do is let gravity work for us. So I set the rear hull section upright. And now what you're going to want to do is test fit your parts. Just make sure that they are mating up cleanly with very little gaps. Make sure that your faces don't need to be sanded down, filed, or adjusted in any other way. Once you've test fit your parts, you're going to apply your adhesive to the mating surfaces, making sure you don't use too much so that it oozes out around the outside. Set it in place, and if you've got it, you can use cyanoacrylate accelerator if you're using the CA glue, or just let that 5-minute epoxy set before we move on to the next part. All right, as you can see, it is beginning to look like a boat. It's pretty darn cool. Now you've got the option, if you are a perfectionist, of addressing these seams, and this will probably be the most challenging aspect of this build because of the intricate details of that bioskin that you see on there. I'll see if I can just zoom in. So this is what we've got to work with here. It is a very clean seam, but again, if you want perfection, we're going to need to do something with that. And what we're going to do is we are going to address it with a little bit of putty, spot and glazing putty. I like Nitrostan as a brand. It's nice stuff. This comes in large tubes like this, but you can get glazing putty anywhere, including your home improvement stores. The other thing that you're going to need is a little bit of acetone to thin it down, because when this comes out, it's like toothpaste, and we want something a little bit thinner than that. So what I've got here is just a lid off of a plastic container. I'm going to put just a little bit of this in, and it does dry quickly, so just bear that in mind. I'm going to grab a little bit of acetone and pour it in the corner of this lid, and that'll allow us to control the mixture ratio. And we're going to mix that in with the acetone until it gets thinned down to a more water-like consistency. We don't want it too thin though, so just using a toothpick, and what we're going to do is we are just going to very carefully dab it along the seam there on the inside of the bioskin recesses, and fill that seam up. So just moving along there, you just get that in the seam, press it in there so that it fits through, and then grab your rag and you're going to wipe it, remove the excess. And that filler should fill the seam up while leaving the bioskin exposed. So you're going to want to do that around the perimeter of these 8 joints. Alright, I have completed filling up those seams. One thing to note, the glazing putty actually shrinks quite a bit. So what you'll notice is you'll put it on, everything is going to look really good, and then it's going to dry, it's going to shrink, those seams might pop a little bit. Put another layer on there, take the time, make it look good. We'll be doing some addressing of these areas cosmetically when we get to the painting portion, but try and get those gaps filled as best you can if you're going to take that step. But we are going to move on while this dries to the EVA doors, and here's an example of one right here. Of course, the idea is that they open up, you know, like a clamshell almost. Really neat detail in there. You can see all the bioskin on the inside there. When these go on, up is going to see the central door there, and then you're going to have 2 spaced evenly or symmetrically on the bottom. So what we're going to do, we're going to take these pieces, and you can see is an artifact of the casting process. We've got almost a little hump on the outside from where the resin bowed up when it cured. So what you're going to want to do is take some sandpaper, likely coarse sandpaper, just put it down, and you're going to rub these so that they get a flush face on the bottom where you're going to be adhering it to the hull. So you've got 6 of these to do. Sand them all down flush and we'll move on to the next step. Okay, up is in that direction. What we're going to be doing is I'm going to be using my super glue gel from Gorilla brand. Just put a little bit in the center there. Again, the top is going to see the centered door and the bottom is going to see the 2 symmetrical doors. So you're going to want to drop it into place there. Ensure that your orientation is bang on, and you've got 1 door done out of 6. So let's get all the rest of those installed. I'll make a note at this particular point that you do have parts here to show the door open, and if you want to do that, you can actually drill into the center part. It's hollow. Install the ring around the outside, and then these little doors mount on these little flanges. And the instructions do, of course, show you how to do that, but this particular build is going to have them all closed. Alright, we are going to move on to what is arguably the most complicated aspect of the build, and that's the assembly of the rear engine section. So we've got these parts here to work with. The rear engine itself, all of the fins. We've got 2 side fins, lower fin and an upper fin. The way to tell these apart is the side fins have the largest curve, and they're also narrower than the other ones. And the top and bottom, one piece is more curved than the other. That is the top, and the one that's almost flat is your bottom piece. Then we've got hydraulic actuators for the fins, which actually adds a lot of realism to the boat. We've got some small diameter and large diameter aluminum tubing that's all pre-cut. And then we have some inserts for the ends that are going to attach into the base and the fins themselves. Then we've got some brass flat stock that we're going to utilize as positionable hinges. So the first thing that we're going to want to do, in the instructions you'll see, the assembly basically is composed of the upper pintle, the insert, the outer sleeve, the lower pintle, and then we've got 2 lower brackets in there that are going to get adhered to the inside of the base. So we're going to start constructing our hydraulic cylinders. Alright, I have released the parts from the sprue. You can see you've got some spare parts in there if you need them. I'm going to start from the bottom and work my way up. So I took the large diameter aluminum tubing and the larger of those pintles, and you basically just press it into place. It's a friction fit. Make sure that your orientation is correct, and you've got that. And then what you're going to do, just use a little drop of thin cyanoacrylate glue, and that will make sure to hold that in place. So that's our bottom hydraulic assembly. Now we're going to do the same thing for the top, but utilizing the small inserts. These just get pressed into place, and then we will have our upper and lower hydraulics. Okay, here is the completed assembly. We've got the lower section and the upper section, and they just slip in together like that, and you can see we've got what looks to be a functional hydraulic cylinder. Alright, I've got the bottom fin here, and you can see I've got my cylinder in place, and this is basically how it is going to sit in there. So what we need to do now is drill some holes through the hinge bracket and through this pintle. Your kit comes supplied with a drill bit, but I'm just going to use one that I've got set up here. And you're going to want to put that centered in that little flat section right there. So that's drilled through all the way, and then you're going to want to do the same thing, drill through on the bracket on the inside there. And there are holes marked out in the castings to show you where to drill, but basically it's centered in those brackets. So that done, these are going to line up, and now we're going to take our supplied brass rod and we're going to push that through the assembly, cut it off where it's finished. Alright, I've got the hinge installed there, and I'm just going to snip my brass rod flush with the outside there, and we've got a tilting, actuating little hydraulic cylinder. We'll pop the other one on there, and you can see it's going to look just like a hydraulic cylinder. Alright, as we can see, I've got all four of my fins completed with the hydraulic cylinders in there. Now what we're going to move on to is the lower end, which is going to get mounted into the rear engine area. And you can see that these are the parts that we're going to be working with. These are the little brackets. Now there's sprue on the bottom, but what I'm going to want you to do when you cut this off, don't cut the part off at the end of the sprue. Leave some sprue on there, and I'll show you what I mean in just 1 second. So what we really want to end up with is a U bracket. So I left some sprue on the bottom. Now certainly if you've broken them off already, or if they're broken off already, it's not a big deal. It's just doing it like this makes it a little bit easier for assembly. And I just used my bandsaw, but if you don't have a bandsaw, you can use a razor saw or a hacksaw to cut the parts out just like this. So what we're going to want to do next is drill through to make our mounting holes right there, and then we are going to move to mounting these in the engine. Alright, here is our completed lower hydraulic assembly. Again, I've got nice hinge action going on right there, and what we're going to end up doing is mounting this inside the slot that's been machined out. It's going to go flush with the bottom and flush with the back. Alright, here's the final assembly kind of in place. You can see the hydraulic cylinder in there. I'm just using my finger as a swivel, but you can see the actuation of that hydraulic cylinder as it moves open and closed. Just make sure that you've got full range of motion. If you need to, you can trim that aluminum tubing to size to make sure that it's not restricting movement when it fully seats downwards. And just make sure the leading edge of your fin lines up with the trailing edge of your engine. Alright, there we go. This is the kind of completed engine assembly. I did trim down the cylinders to make them fit a little bit better. I'm going to say they're 5/8 of an inch long at this point, secured in place with my cyanoacrylate gel, and now we are ready to move on to mounting our fins. Alright, here are the assembled hinge pieces. You can see I have sanded both sides of the portion that's going to be going into the hull, and the one side that's going to remain on the fin. Used the thick gel CA for this purpose, and I got those holes in there to make sure that they come all the way through. When you adhere different materials especially, you need to make sure that you rough up the surfaces so that you get maximum bonding. And these are going to see a lot of action as you move them up and down for display, and you certainly don't want that breaking off. So this is going to make a really strong bond. Next step, we are going to be taping off, masking this cylinder portion. We want to keep that shiny. And then I'm just going to hit this with some primer on the inside, because once we have it bonded to the model, it's going to be quite difficult to access it for painting. So I'm going to put that base coat down now before we adhere it to the model. So here's a little trick that I'm going to use for masking. I've used actually some heat shrink. Just dropped that over the end. Use just a little bit of heat, just enough pressure so that it doesn't fall off. This is nice and easy to do, so I'm just going to set that piece of heat shrink at the height that I want it and just lightly hit it with a little bit of heat, and that's all. It's going to stay in place now during the painting process, and I don't have to mess with masking tape and the additional danger of breaking our hinge there. All right, I've jumped ahead a little bit here, but you can see the steps are pretty easy to follow. I've primed the engine area in flat black, mostly because when you install the engine thrusters there, the nozzles, you want to make sure that you've got all the undercuts filled with a dark paint. The inner sections of the fins have also been primed, and then I dry brushed it with a little bit of silver, and you can see all of that amazing bioskin detail in there, and that'll be visible once you spread the fins if you choose to display it in that manner. I've also removed the masking from the polished portions of these hydraulic cylinders, and I have roughed up again the hinges, these brass sheets, to make sure that we get maximum adhesion when we secure these to the engine section, which is what we are going to do next. The next step is going to be to adhere the nozzles, these discharge nozzles, into the engine. Now's a good time to be doing that. They just go in place just like that. I'll adhere that with a little bit of that thick CA glue. All right, there we go. How cool looking is that? It's the completed engine module. Next step is going to be to adhere these fins onto the engine unit itself. And what I've done is I've made sure to file these open so that that thickness of brass fits flush with the outer edge of that engine nacelle, so that when we mount it to the hull, there's no gaps. So I'm just going to rough that up, and we're going to adhere all 4 of these fins together, ensuring that the leading edge lines up with the outer edge of that engine nozzle, so it's a nice flush fit. All right, I've got all 4 of the fins put in place there, but you can see that our hydraulic cylinders are still disassembled, and so what we are going to want to do is push the engine unit down and bend the fin out until you can get it to the point where you can insert the hydraulic cylinder end into the outer sleeve. So just bend the fin out, slip the cylinder into the outer sleeve, and then once you do that, you can bend it back down again so that it's at the appropriate angle. And do that with all 4 of the fins, and you'll be in good shape for the next step. Okay, one thing that you can do at this point is sand flush the bottom edge of that engine unit. I'm just going to use my belt sander here, but you could use just a piece of sandpaper on a flush, flat surface, and you're just going to push it down and drag it back and forth until you end up with a perfectly flush mating surface on the back. Now, realistically, you're not going to need to do too much in there if you did a good job of prepping those little recesses to make sure that the brass didn't protrude too much. But this is always a fallback, and it'll help make things fit really well once you get it mounted. All right, let's take a look at a test fit here. You've got little tabs and notches there that line up, and if you push this in, it should be a relatively flush fit. If not, obviously make some adjustments. What I actually found worked really good, if you've got one, is to take a heat gun and you can heat up this face to make it more malleable. Make sure if you do that though, just poke a hole, because when you heat it up, this is sealed, and so the warm air is actually going to press that out. So just pop a little hole in there, heat it up, and then when you press this into place, the resin will just conform exactly to the shape that you have inside there, and it'll be a perfect fit. All right, I have adhered the rear engine assembly to the main model, and while that cures, while that dries, I'm going to mount the turbo intakes, and those parts look like this when they come. They got a big piece of flash on the bottom. There's a flange that you can see on the bottom. You don't need that. You're going to cut it so that it looks something like this. I just trimmed it out with a pair of side cutters. What you're going to want to do now is mark out the locations for those heaters, and there's a pair of windows, 2 windows. I just highlighted it with some pencil. If you draw a vertical line going down across the inside of this rear football, that's the plane that you're going to be mounting these heaters on, and they go one on top of the other just like this. So you're going to need to do is file the mating surface so that it meets the contour of the hull in both pieces. So I'm going to do that right now, and then we're going to be adhering that to the hull permanently. Alright, when you've got them adhered, it should look something like this. Forward edges should be flush, pointing directly forward, and the mounting edge should be flush with the hull in both cases. So I'm done with the starboard side. I'm going to move on to the port side. Okay, while the boat is drying, I got some primer on there so I can see what these seams look like. We're going to move on to the display stand, and we've got basically 6 pieces. You've got the main display base, the plaque, forward arms, and rear arms, and then of course you've also got these support braces, 1/8 inch brass rods. So you're going to want to group these pieces together, and if you take a look at the tips, they look a little bit different. One of them's got solid faces in the front, and the other one has some openings in there, and the reason being is that when I created these files, when I subtracted these parts from the 3D model itself, that's the way that the contours came out. So you've got the ones with the openings grouped together, and you've got the ones that are solid grouped together. What we're going to do is we're going to place these brass rods into the holes, and we're not going to glue them yet. So it's going to look something like this, and then we're going to set them in place, gluing them forward and back. Alright, here you can see the completed display stand. I've adhered all 4 pieces to the stand. I have secured the brass in here with a little bit of thin CA on each side, so it's very solid right now. The end with the notches, with those openings, is forward. That's the front part of your boat. Now you need to make a decision as to where you want to put the display stand or the plaque. I choose to display the boat moving from left to right, and therefore I'm going to adhere it on this side, the close side to me, and you're going to center it so that the triangle is centered on the boat, and you're going to want to match up the lip here to the upper edge. It's just going to sit right on the upper part of the display stand. Secure that with a little bit of thin CA and you are good to go. Alright, there is the completed display stand, and you can see that the arms basically match up perfectly with the contours of the hull, both left and right. When you display it, you're going to want the EVA sphere there centered over the triangle, and that will make sure that all of the surfaces line up well. Alright everyone, what I'm going to show you now is completely optional. These seams, as you can see, are actually pretty good, but lost some of the detail of the bioskin. Now, you would actually be able to recreate that after you dry brush it with a little bit of careful application with a paintbrush if you would like. Another option, and this will be an add-on if you would like to get the kit and try this, but you can purchase a sheet of the bioskin webbing, and it's going to come like this. This is a vinyl application, and this is actually the same way that we created the bioskin pattern on the actual original model. So all I do is tear off or cut off a little section, peel off the backing, and you get this basically a sticker. And then what I do is tear the outside edge in a fairly straight but random pattern. And what I'm doing here is I'm making a patch for those seams. So now that I've got that, all I'm going to do is center that over the seam and press it down. And it's a good idea after you do it, use a little bit of heat as well. And that creates, like I said, a patch that extends over the seam, and it will, after you dry brush it, make a really nice finish. And I'll show you what that looks like here after I prime it. Alright, so we made some progress here. As you saw earlier, got the stand completely assembled, and I've just gone ahead and painted it. I based this out in a dark silver metallic, and then I painted the logo, the plaque there, according to the painting instructions. That was very straightforward, simply used a brush for that aspect of it. Turned out quite well. So the stand is quite a simple matter. Now you can also see that I have based out the Nautilus in a dark blue color, and I'll get the paint for you shortly so that you can see which color I used. But the stage that I'm on to right now is dry brushing, and I'm using a large soft bristled brush. This is probably the trickiest part of the process for painting, because you want to make sure that you bring out that really cool bioskin finish. So I'm just going to show you how I go about doing that. I'm going to zoom in here so that you can see the process. So I've got this very light blue, like robin egg blue paint. Just get a little bit on the tip, and I'm going to brush that out on a rag like this, and so there's almost nothing left on it. And then what you're going to do is you're just going to lightly brush the model with light strokes going in random directions, and you'll see as you go it leaves the recessed areas the dark blue, and it leaves the raised areas, the bioskin, that really light blue color. So let's take a closer look at that. And that's what you will end up with. So what you're going to want to do is go over the entire model with that technique and you'll have that bioskin finish. Alright, let's take a look at the finished product, but before we do, I promised that I would show you my base coat. This is a simple rattle can from Home Depot. It's a Rust-Oleum product. Satin navy blue works really well. It's a great color, really dark blue because you want as much contrast as you can get. Take a look at the hull here. Bioskin finish really comes out nicely. The trick to this is to make sure that your brush is extremely dry when you brush it. Better to have to apply a little bit more than to put too much on there and have to strip it or overpaint it and redo it again. So next step is going to be highlighting all of these landing pads, painting out the missile hatches on the top, bringing out some of those upper deck details. Alright, here is the model with some of the surface details highlighted out. I just used some white paint tinted with just a hint of blue to give that cool white color. So I highlighted these landing pads fore and aft, and then I went over the missile hatches in the same dark base coat as the model was painted initially. What I'm going to be doing now is I'm going to be taking this communications array, which is a separate piece, and I'm going to actually be mounting it on a wire so that the owner will be able to display the model with it in the retracted or extending position. And then after that, really the only thing left to do is to put some lights in the windows of the model. So we are getting there, almost done. Alright, here we go. This is the completed model, and as you can see, I've added the communications array, and I just used some brass rod, mounted a little piece of brass tubing in there that it slips into, curls up and then mounts into the actual communications array, and it just friction fits. You can pop that wire out of both ends and you can drop that communications array right into its nest on the upper deck there. Really happy with the way that it turned out. That bioskin with those contrasting colors turned out really well in this color combination. So as you can see, this is not an overly complicated build. There's a few little tricky parts, namely in the dry brushing aspect and the blending of the hull, but it's certainly not something that someone with a little bit of patience can figure out. Thank you very much for joining me. Hope you enjoyed this product. If you're interested in ordering it, you can do so off of my website at nautilusdrydocks.com. Thanks for joining me, everybody, and we will catch you next time.